Hey there, welcome to the DFS Build NBA edition. I'm Kevin Roberts, ready to go over the Showdown slate for Game 1 of the NBA Finals. This is a fun one because you can enter to win $1 million. I have a million ticket of my own that I will be playing, and it'll be fun to do. Obviously, this is a showdown between the Mavs and Celtics. We really don't know what to expect from this series just because, all season long, I've been saying Boston's going to win the championship. I don't really know why I would go away from that now. I guess the only reason would be, can we trust that Kristaps Porzingis is going to be fully available / healthy and productive? And also, are the Mavs just lightning in a bottle here? They just took out the top defensive team in the NBA. They could be a problem for sure. I personally want Dallas to win. I think they're the more likable team. But Boston has more experience. They're the better defensive team. They have more superstar power. So across the board, I would be leading Boston here. And that starts right away in game 1. Obviously we have a 214.5 total, and Boston has been very, very good at home all season. And, understandably they're 6.5 point favorites. So I'd be leading Boston if I'm betting on the game. If I just think, who's going to win this game, I think it's going to be Boston. I'm hopeful that it's going to be a close game, but it is what it is. With a showdown slate, I don't really like to play for blowouts just because, specifically here, it's the NBA Finals. So I would imagine Dallas is going to show up. And they played Minnesota so incredibly well, and they kind of dominated really in that series to the point where I believe that they can give it a go and they have a shot here. That said, let's get right into it. At RotoGrinders, we actually have tentative projections and ownership numbers, especially for captain. So that's always nice. We can take a look at that. One of my favorite things to do is just go look at captain and look at where the ownership is at the moment based off of, their lineup options and see where we can take advantage just on captain ownership alone. So obviously starting off, Luka Doncic at 20.4K is just really, really restrictive if you start with him at captain. He is the most owned captain, though, because he has the best ceiling. He put up 78 fantasy points per game in 2 meetings with Boston. So obviously this is a matchup that he has the ability to thrive in. Worth noting that Boston won both those games, and for the most part, regular season series history does serve as a fairly decent indicator as far as how the series is going to go. That was not the case last series for Minnesota versus Dallas, but it could be here for sure. Small sample size, of course, just 2 games, but either way, we don't really care that much about that. For DFS purposes, Luka has crushed. He crushed in both those games. So he looks awesome as the captain. The only issue at all is ownership and the fact that he's super expensive. So can we get away with sliding Luka into utility and building our roster, and also get different at the same time? I think, yeah. I've been looking at Luka lineups with him and the captain. I'm not a big fan of what I'm getting. You could certainly play the angle like, oh, Luka smashes, but the rest of the Mavs don't, and Boston wins easily. And then you can, go to Dallas and Boston punts. Maybe you can get away with that. It's not like it's a bad idea to play Luka in the captain. He's the best play on the board. But as far as ownership and saving cash, I will not be captaining him a lot. I'll be very underweight as far as that goes. But I do see him as a must for the utility slot. Right behind him is Jason Tatum, kind of the same deal. I think at 17.7K, you can play him a little bit more than you'd play Luka. His projection feels a little bit light, coming at 49.49 fantasy points at rotogrinders.com. But also kind of on par with a healthy Boston team, especially if Porzingis is back. We don't know for sure if that's the case. Let me double check his status right now. That said, he participated in a couple drills and they're pleased with his rehab progress, but no official word just yet. So even if he is back, though, obviously he could be limited. But the whole point is, when Boston is at like actual full strength with Porzingis back in there, the usage distribution just kind of evens out a little bit more. So it's still going to go Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Porzingis, but that's just going to mean a little bit less upside for someone like Tatum. That said, he absolutely crushed in the 2 games he faced the Mavs in earlier this year as well. He averaged 59.9 fantasy points per game. Obviously, he's had a really good playoff run. He's had 56 plus fantasy points in like 6 of his last 7 games. He had the 70 burger 2 games ago. So, price, ownership, and perhaps a little bit of rust from a long layoff, that would be the only real concerns. But much like Luka, I'm loving Tatum and I'm just sliding him over utility. It's kind of like in the Mavs Timberwolves series, I wanted a lot of Luka and Anthony Edwards. And I just, for the most part, I would just go chase somebody else in the captain to get different and actually be able to afford these guys. And I'd slide them over to utility. And that's what I'm going to do here as well. You can absolutely play Luka and Tate at the captain if you feel good about where your lineup winds up with all the values. I just feel it stretches me a little bit too thin, so I don't really want to do that at a high level. Moving right along, Kyrie Irving is the third highest owned captain play, which probably makes me not that interested because honestly, here's the deal. Kyrie Irving is a fine play. You can play him at utility. You can definitely play him at captain still because he's not as chalky as Luka and Tatum. And obviously, if Dallas is going to have a chance to win the series, he's going to have to show up. And if you want to play narrative street, Kyrie going up against Boston, where he kind of like went and failed as a leader, definitely a spot where he would want to show up and deliver twofold. I mean, obviously to pay it back to Boston and then also to win a championship kind of on his own without LeBron, right? So there is that. I will just say he is super, super scoring dependent. So if he's not crushing as a scorer, he's just not going to get there really. He had 3 games against the best defense in the league where he had 30 plus real points, and only one time did he have over 45 fantasy points. So is it going to cripple you if he comes out and scores 44 to 50 fantasy points? No, that's good. There's nothing wrong with that, especially on a showdown slate. Not that many guys are going to come out and equal or better him. So he remains extremely viable. But if he's going to be super chalky across the board, and especially the third highest owned captain play, I'm just going to go somewhere else probably and just hope that this is like an off game for Kyrie, or he's just okay and he doesn't like completely nuke the slate. Worth noting that in the biggest game of that previous series to close it out, he had 36 real points and 50 fantasy points. So he's been showing up. Like he had a really good series against Minnesota, and that was not an easy matchup. It's pretty arguable that like his isolated matchup against probably Drew Holiday is going to get worse. But as far as motivation, talent level, and ability, he's certainly in play, and I have no problem with him. I just think if I'm looking at paying for a top guy, he's probably fourth on my list of guys that I feel really good about. I go Luka and Tatum for sure. I want them in utility. And I'd probably go Jaylen Brown over Kyrie first, especially since he's going to be less owned and they project about the same and they're about the same price. So that brings me to Jaylen Brown too. At the captain slot, I'm more interested in him and captain than Kyrie. A little bit more interested in him and captain than Jason Tatum as well, just because it's a good leverage play right now on Tatum because Tatum is like almost twice as owned, at least projected. So yeah, he just is a rock solid play. Jaylen Brown is probably the other guy for Boston that kind of wrecked Dallas during the regular season. 46 fantasy points per game, 29.5 real points per game in those two matchups. So if it's not Tatum that's crushing, it's almost guaranteed to be Jaylen Brown. So I think it's decent to bank on him being the guy and slide him at captain. But he's also totally viable. It's just a solid utility play at 9.4K. Here's the thing. If we're going to not captain Luka and Tatum, we need to start getting serious about all these other guys that could end up being, smash plays at captain. So it starts for me obviously with Jaylen, but then you start looking at the ownership dipping quite a bit. And you look at somebody like Derek White, who looks really decent as a utility play, but really could be the ticket at the captain. He's had 42 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games, 38 plus fantasy points in each of his last 5 games. So he's cooking right now. So to get Derek White at pretty low ownership. I mean, maybe 7% captain slot right now? Probably less, really. That's pretty appealing to me. I think he's totally fine at 7.4K in the utility slot if that's where you wind up. Nothing wrong with that at all. And I just think he has a good floor and a reasonable ceiling. So he's one of my favorite captain plays when you get away from those, obviously, locked in studs. Drew Holiday is the bane of my existence just because I've been preaching all playoffs long that he's just not a high usage guy. He's not an amazing permanence guy in this offense. And sure enough, he just continues to just make me look stupid and just wreck game after game. Even when he's not wrecking, he gets like 31 or 36 fantasy points, which based on his price is still kind of wrecking. Like he's been crushing. He has that one crazy 54 point fantasy game, but worth noting in his other last 5 games, he has not topped 38 fantasy points at all. So like I said, I mean, he's getting it done really for the price, but he just is not this high ceiling guy. So at 10.2K in the captain slot and carrying a little bit of ownership, he'd probably be the first guy beyond those top studs where I'm just like, nah, don't really want to do that for captain. I think at 6.8K, if you land on him in utility, there's nothing wrong with that. He's totally fine. He had 35 fantasy points per game across 2 meetings with Dallas. So again, if we can get about 35 fantasy points from Jrue Holiday, we're going to feel pretty good about it. But if Porzingis actually is back, again, that usage is going to dip even more. And so I would not feel that good about him. Just, I will say, if I've gotten anybody wrong throughout this playoff run when I'm doing these videos, Jrue Holiday is the one. So if you feel at all like Jrue Holiday could smash, go against me here. Captain Jrue Holiday, win all the money, man, because it could happen. I just personally, I mean, you have to take stands. You have to look for ways to get leverage and stuff. And I think Jrue Holiday at 6% or 7%, the captain is fine. I just, if he's going to be chalky, I'm probably going to go away from him and play, Derek White or find somebody else in the similar price range. Al Horford looks fine at 6K, but obviously if Porzingis is back, he's going to eat into his floor and take away his ceiling. If Porzingis is not back, Horford looks awesome at 6K for a nice utility play. Don't think I'd captain him just because he does not have a really high ceiling, but he's a decent points per minute guy, and he would be locked into 30 plus minutes if Porzingis was out. If Porzingis is in, you could still get like 25 minutes, but I just wouldn't feel as good about him. If Porzingis is in, he's a little bit too expensive still because we don't know how rusty he's going to be, how many minutes he's going to play, just how good he's going to be. So at 4% ownership for captain, I mean, you could try Porzingis in the off chance he comes in just like crushes and plays like 30 minutes or something, but I would imagine he'd be limited, or there's always the chance of re-injury or just being ineffective. So I'm probably not on Porzingis here. If you want to play narrative street, he's facing Dallas, his old team, and going up against Luka, so he certainly could come to play. And he did have success in the one game he played against them, 24 real points, 38.5 fantasy points. So I think he's a fine GPP dart. It's just the price and the minutes projection and the overall projection make me not that interested in general. I'm going to go back to the well on PJ Washington personally. It's not a good matchup at all, but he's one of the top guys as far as projection goes. He's projected for 39 real minutes. And as we know, minutes are currency in DFS. So if I can get PJ Washington playing almost 40 minutes in this game, I'm going to kind of ignore the matchup and just hope that he crushes. And with, Boston's obviously going to be focusing on slowing down Kyrie and Luka. So could PJ Washington step up kind of like he did in the OKC series and crush here? Certainly possible. Here's the thing. He did not go nuclear against Minnesota, but he still had 10 plus real points in every game in that series. And obviously in the OK series, he had 3 games over 40 fantasy points, and he had that crazy 58-point fantasy game. So if Boston kind of takes that blueprint and tries to make PJ Washington beat them, we could get a pretty high usage game out of him and possibly see him smash. So for utility, 6.4K for PJ Washington, a guy who's going to play 40 minutes, looks awesome. I like that a lot. I like that a lot. But in the name of getting different at captain and freeing ourselves up a little bit to go get Luka and Tatum and do other things, I think PJ Washington as a 5 to 6% owned captain looks really, really good again. Obviously, the floor is not amazing. He's had like 4 of his last 5 games under 30 fantasy points. So I hear you. That's not super encouraging. But he has displayed the ceiling. And honestly, I mean, as far as NBA players go with streakiness and stuff, he's kind of due to explode. He's a decent offensive player. And they're going to need him. They're going to need his size and everything with Porzingis and Horford there. So I like him. I like him as a captain. I think as utility, he's rock solid. The only other captain play that I'm really looking at is Derek Lively. I think Derek Lively is very interesting because he's only going to be 4% owned, 4 to 5% roughly. And they're going to need him big time. He's been super, super efficient for Dallas. He obviously exited that one game against the Timberwolves, but in 9 minutes, he had 14 fantasy points. In 4 of his last 5 games, 5 of his last 6 games, he's had 28 plus fantasy points. So he's doing well. He's doing well, even though he's kind of splitting the minutes with Daniel Gafford at the 5. So if we can bank on those minutes, 25 upwards of 30 minutes or so, in a spot where they absolutely need him, Derek Lively looks really, really good for utility at 5.6. and looks like a super viable captain play just because he's not going to be owned. And we know he can get 30 to 40 fantasy points. And if he can do that at low ownership, I'm definitely interested. We could certainly take punts on Gafford, Derek Jones Jr., and all these other cheap guys. You can really play anybody in the captain spot when you when you start talking about, just all kinds of possibilities with lineups. You can do that all you want. But that's just not what I like to do for the most part, because you need the really, really crazy outlier game for that to pay off. All right, switch over to the utility spot. Get a drink quick. So, a utility spot. So everybody is viable in a showdown slate. I think when you're looking at guys like Lively and Gafford both in play, I would lean toward Lively just because I don't think he's going to, get the. He's not going to be facing the main Boston Bigs quite as much as Daniel Gafford will be. So I think he projects better too. So he's going to be a little bit more owned, but and like $200 more expensive. But I don't really care. I think Lively is just a better play, and since they're so close, so comparable, I'm just going to go Lively there. PJ Washington overall ownership is really low, so I like him quite a bit. Like I was saying, Drew Holiday is fine. I prefer Derek White. He's a little bit more owned, but he comes in with a better projection, a little bit more expensive. He's just got the better ceiling, better floor. So I will gladly pay a little bit more and play a slightly more owned Derek White over Drew. Love Luka, love Tatum. I'm fine with Kyrie. I prefer Jaylen Brown over Kyrie. Let's see. Anybody else who stands out? Now we can get down to the values. Obviously, the top level guys, mid-range guys, it's kind of more about like which expensive guys are you not going to captain, or are you going to be underweight on captain? Which expensive guys are you just going to be like super underweight overall on? And which chalky guys in the mid-range are you not going to be on? So obviously, I talked about Kyrie and Drew as being two guys where I'm probably going away from. Probably not going to have a lot of interest in Porzingis. So as we go down here to save some cash, we're looking at guys like Derek Jones Jr., probably the safest value play on the board at 4.6K. We just know he's going to play a ton. Obviously, with Maxi Kleber back, there's always the chance his minutes take a hit, but that really hasn't happened yet. He's played 30-plus minutes in every game in the previous series, and he's had a role with 27-plus minutes in every game of the playoffs. I think for one game against the Clippers, he played 27-plus minutes in every single game. So I like him a lot at 4.6K. Not really feeling him as a captain play just because he has such a low floor. But we know he's going to play probably about 35 minutes in this game, and he can get there for that price tag as a utility option. Peyton Pritchard's been losing his minutes, so I'm not quite as into him as I would be normally. Let's see what he's been doing lately. I think he played 9 minutes last game in a close game. That's not great. 14 minutes the last game before that, 19 before that. So his minutes have been in decline. So, you can play him. It's a showdown slate, and you can, if it's a blowout, especially, he could get more run, but their rotation is tightening up, and he's not really a featured element of that. Sam Hauser and Luke Cornett and all these other value guys for Boston are not really on my radar with Porzingis back. If Porzingis is out, I think Hauser at 2.2K is fine. I think Cornett or whatever other Boston guy we feel good about as far as getting minutes would be viable. Like O'Shea Brissett had 12 and 9 minutes in his last two games against the Pacers. So if we think that's going to happen, we can go with him. Cornett had 5 minutes in the last game, so not quite as optimistic about him. Hauser, though, is probably the one that feels the best as far as like a Boston punt at 2.2K, 13-plus minutes in each of his last 3 games in that series. I wouldn't really be on him if Porzingis returned, but if Porzingis is out, Hauser would look pretty good. And I'd be okay with taking a shot on Cornett or Brissett, or even Xavier Tillman or something. Like if you're doing a lot of lineups, you can definitely rotate those guys in. But would I feel amazing about them and would I captain them? No. As far Dallas is probably where we'd be looking at most of the value, because Maxi Kleber is coming at 2.4K, and he's played 9+ minutes in his first 2 games back from injury. His size might be needed here more with obviously Tatum and Al Horford and Porzingis if Porzingis is in. So if Porzingis is in, I like Kleber a lot at 2.4K. Obviously, the ceiling is not high. The floor is very, very low. but they will need his size, and the healthier he is, the more minutes he'll get. And there's always the case of Gafford potentially struggling a lot, and then we see a lot more Lively and Kleba by default. Dwight Powell just is not getting enough minutes for me to really consider him, so that's really just down to Jaden Hardy and Josh Green. Jaden Hardy's had 8+ minutes in like 7 straight games. He hasn't really done a whole lot with it. He needs to be popping off as a scorer to pay off, but at 2.8K, you can certainly take a stab at him. Not putting him in the captain slot personally, because the minutes haven't been there, and he really doesn't do much beyond scoring. But I think as a utility play, he's totally fine. He's coming in only at 10% ownership, so I like him a lot more than that. So if he's going to be that low owned, he's pretty appealing. I will note that Dante Exum kind of came in and played a ton of minutes out of nowhere. He had played like 10 minutes total in the series, and then last game he played 11 minutes. He didn't do much with his time out there, only 5 fantasy points, but if he's going to play 10+ minutes against Boston, he looks like a smash play at 2.K flat. Not going to play him in the captain slot, but he looks like pretty good chalk at what? Let's see, where is he? It's at 10% ownership. That's not chalky actually at all. So if he's going to be overlooked at 2K flat, he looks pretty interesting. Josh Green's kind of chalky. Maxi Kleber's kind of chalky, 18 to 17% relative to punts in this showdown slate. I would imagine their ownership ticks up, to be honest. They both are fine. I prefer Kleba because you save a little bit more money, and I think he's going to be needed more in this series. Also, Josh Green has not been like a really good permanent guy. I mean, he's cheap and he's getting like 17+ minutes every game right now. He just isn't doing anything when he's out there. He has 7, 9, and 8 fantasy points in his last 3 games. Obviously, he can buck that trend and pay off and get it done for you, and he's not expensive. Just not a really good permanence guy. I don't envision a lot of success for him here, so I would just personally rather get Kleba as if they're going to be at the same price. I don't think pairing them together really helps you out that much. You can do that. It's not like it's impossible to get there with that being the case. I just wouldn't want. I would imagine their ownership goes up, so I wouldn't want to eat double the Dallas chalk if I don't have to. I would probably play like Hardy and one of them together instead of those two guys together. All right, that is going to do it for me. Looks like Tim Hardaway Jr. is basically out of this rotation. He's 2K flat. He played 5 minutes. He hasn't even been playing. So we can't trust Tim Hardaway Jr. unless something crazy happens, like big injury or something. So that is where I'm at for the most part. I'm looking to get different at captain, obviously, but I still want both Luka and Tatum in my lineup. So if I'm running through here and I am putting both these dudes, Luka and Tatum, in my utility, and then I'm going down. Love Lively. I could captain him, but let's just say I put him in the utility, like a lot of other people are going to do. Don't have any problem with that. And then I could also go and get Derrick Jones Jr. just because I know he's going to play a ton of minutes. And then if I get my boy PJ Washington, then I could go all the way up and eat that chalky play of Drew Holiday, but low owned in the captain slot. Or I could flip it and put PJ Washington in the captain slot, who I like. And at 7.2, I can go get Drew Holiday down there. I don't mind eating the Drew Holiday chalk if he's my last guy in. I just don't want to make him a priority. And if I can do it, I would rather have Derek White there. Actually, the way I did that, I meant to put Jason Tatum in there, but Jaylen Brown was in there. And you could also put Jaylen Brown up top if you want in the captain. But then you just got to go down from Derrick Jones Jr. All right, so anyways, hopefully that helps you out. My starting point would be building with Luka and Tatum in the utility and start following in some of these values that I was talking about. And then also consider guys like PJ Washington, Jaylen Brown, and Derek White at the captain slot. Hopefully that helps you out. If it does, please give this video a like and also consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching and good luck.